Got a live streaming failed error. Let me reload. I'll be right back.
Cool.
Maybe we should ask the audience if someone can hear us.
All right, we're live.
Ah, we are. There we go.
Can you all hear us?
There you go.
All right. Cool. Well, thanks for joining, Fraud Fighters. I've been particularly excited about this session because I think we have some of the best fraud minds here, not only that are presenting, but that are also here in the chat. So this is going to be a really interactive session. We're really excited about it. It's called Mid-Year Fraud Predictions Live AMA. Excited to hear what your fraud predictions are. And I'm Chris Worley, head of marketing. I'm going to go off screen here in just a minute, but wanted to let you all know that we're recording this session, so it'll be available on demand after the fact. And in terms of Q&A, leverage the chat button. So click on chat, drop all your comments in. We want to see it. We want to see it all. Bring your questions up. PJ, Ronald, Frank are going to answer it. And with that, over to you, PJ.
All right. Thank you, Chris, so much. Oh, now you get my whole room and my dog bed over here, which is really hairy. Anyways, good to see everyone. Thank you for joining. Privileged to be alongside my co-founder, Ronald Pradish and Frank McKenna. Quick intro to myself and then the other two, and then we want to get right into the conversation. So co-founder of About Fraud, worked in fraud prevention roughly 15 years, partially on the operations side, then partially solution providers, and now running a kick-ass fraud fighting community. So yeah, that's enough from me. We'll go over to Ronald next.
Hey guys, I'm Ronald. I'm the other part of the co-founder team from About Fraud. Similar to PJ, I've been around in the industry for around 15 years, working for big merchants, smaller merchants, payment providers, banks, and in the last years, mainly as a consultant. And yeah, I mean, happy to be here and having a great session with PJ and Frank. Frank, to you.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. Frank McKenna. I do a blog called Frank on Fraud. That's how most people know me. I also have a company here in San Diego called Point Predictive. I'm really happy to be here today. I love this Fraud Fighters Unit 2021 session with the interactivity of the chat. So I'm looking forward to the conversation, not only as we speak, but as we kind of look at your comments as you chat, because I think it's really interactive and it's just a great platform. So excited
Awesome
to be here.
Thank you so much, Frank. And listen, we're going to have a few polls along the way. I think it's good to chuck one in now, kind of stoke some conversation. It doesn't have to be about this poll. It doesn't have to be about any specific prediction. So fire away in the chat. I'll try to keep track of them. Obviously, I'm going to miss some. But let's start with this poll here. And hopefully you can all see it. What is your prediction for the fraud typology that will be most prevalent by the end of the year? For anyone who cannot read, I read that for you. So I love seeing these live as they tick up and down, or well, not down, but one more than the other. As expected, scams, and I think in LinkedIn there was a question like this, and scams won out. But you know, and actually, first-party fraud would probably have been my next pick. As these come in, Ronald, Frank, are you guys surprised by any of this?
I don't think so. I think these are kind of what we've been seeing. So I think this is exactly what I would expect.
Yeah.
Also, the interesting part, scams are across all the industries. So that's why it depends on the audience which we have. That's totally aligned that everybody talks about scams.
Yeah, it interacts with other ones, right? You can scam somebody to commit wire fraud. You can scam somebody to release information that then you use to take over their account. So, you know, like a lot of fraud trends, a lot of them can intersect with one another. Very cool. So let me switch back to the chat. This isn't my normal webinar functionality, so I will do my best to be seamless with this. There's one up here from Mark. Are scammers using the ATT data to better target victims, better knowing the bank relationships from OTP sent across? I saw a nod from Frank. So
yeah. I haven't heard of specifically that yet, but I think that AT&T data is going to open up a whole bunch of imposter scams, whether it's bank to customer or family to family or colleagues, because they have that data. They know who you texted, who you called, and they can triangulate that with, using PII tools and see, who do I talk to the most? That's probably my wife or a colleague, and they're going to use that data to do a lot of spoofing. So I think absolutely, I think we're going to see a big increase in that.
Yeah, and I mean, data breaches in general. I think how rich the information is important to understand. AT&T, obviously, with the OTPs and the phone numbers and all the associated banking information, it's really bad. But and I had a really bad dad joke, so I'll say it. My new AT&T logo was AT and PII. See, the delivery of that was just brutal, which is why it's a dad joke. So, Ronald, do you have any thoughts on the AT&T, or we can fire along to the next question?
Let's take the next one.
All right. Guillermo, do you think fraudsters might take advantage of the recent events in the U.S., parentheses, with elections, all the situation with Trump and all? Wow, we got a Trump already. Anyone want to dive into this? I can give my initial thoughts. I think fraudsters take advantage of any situation where there's unrest, fear, and vulnerable people. And that's not to say any specific political party. Politics in general causes all of the above. And really any type of event like that will, I think, make people susceptible to lots of different frauds, social engineering and scams in particular, whether it's supporting candidates, whether it's luring them into clicking on different things because people are emotionally charged one way or the other. And whenever our emotions are spiked, that's when fraudsters really like to leverage social engineering and manipulating us to do certain things. So I think for sure, but take the election out of it, put us in a whole nother year, put us in a beautiful political climate, which I can't imagine, but we'll still have a ton of scams because there's way more levers you can still pull on than just the US, political environment.
Yeah. I have maybe one comment, PJ, when I see the questions again regarding Snowflake. So in general, we talk about responsibility between banks and consumers. So if a scam is happening or ABP fraud or whatnot, so we can sell a lot of fraud happening. But data breaches, maybe the question to Frank, if all this data breaches happening all the time, how much responsibility should go back to these kind of companies who lost all the data? Do you think we're going to have this discussion down the road that we might take these people or these companies on the hook who actually not securing the data in the right way?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of already happening with the lawsuits. There's a lot of class action lawsuits anytime you have that. So in those cases, the only people that win are the lawyers. And so there's not a lot of money for the victims. Is there a new way to do that? Probably. And I think over time, they will find a way to kind of reimburse those victims in a better way than just these class action lawsuits.
Yeah. And I see some questions obviously coming through in the Q&A. All good. I can pivot. If you want to put them in the chat just to streamline it, we can do that. I think I'll go over to Frank for this because it has the word auto loans in it and fraud. Yeah. So that's your bread and butter. Are you seeing more of cryptocurrency fraud scams in auto loans? If so, by what percentage? If you can.
Yeah, that's kind of an easy one. I'm not seeing a lot of cryptocurrency fraud scams in auto. We look at a lot of auto loans here in my company, and we don't see cryptocurrency being reported as much, but we do see a lot more phishing at the dealerships. There was a big breach of CDK about 3 weeks ago, and we just see a tremendous increase in phishing attempts against dealerships and imposter scams saying they were from CDK, trying to get dealers to give their logins and things like that. So there is more of that type of activity, but I haven't seen cryptocurrency yet emerge as a big fraud type.
All right. Let's keep it rolling here. One from Thomas. What is your position on refund fraud? Industry still calls it friendly fraud, but our research shows that concession abuse as a service is the fastest growing fraud these 4 years. So I mean, you could say, what is your position on friendly fraud? Is it fraud? Is it not? On things beyond refund fraud, I think it's how much it damages the company, the brand, the bottom line, and whether these are quote unquote good customers, like, not third party stealing information and going that route. It's still extremely damaging and can rise to the levels of not friendly fraud. So to your point, growing that fast over the last 4 years, with I think refund fraud, from the things I read, listening to Chris Hendrick talk about it, probably a long time before even others were talking about it, and Amazon in particular, it's a massive problem. And I'm not surprised that it is. It's so easy to commit. And I will not name a name of a friend or somebody I know who was like, oh, I'll just buy that on Amazon and then return it when I'm done, because I'll get my money back. And I was like, that's kind of actually a fraud. So it's very prevalent, and so I think it's so easy, and so there's little consequences. And anytime you kind of have that formula, that ease of access, no consequences, and so wide scale, then yeah, I think it's a big problem. Any thoughts on this, guys?
Yeah, it's a total fraud. It's the biggest first-party fraud scheme out there. I think companies like Amazon are going after these fraudsters in court now, and they're working with the FBI and some of the other big retailers as well. So I think what we're going to see with refund fraud is a lot more focus on it from a law enforcement perspective and from a legal perspective, where they're actually suing these people and trying to hold them accountable, which is great. I think more retailers should kind of follow suit. But yeah, it's a massive fraud problem, and we all pay for it, right? Because those retailers have to pass that cost on to consumers that don't do it.
Yeah, and I think that's how some people morally justify it. It's like, Amazon can afford it. The big banks can afford it if it's friendly fraud there. And it's like, yeah, but you got to kind of connect the dots, and eventually those costs are passed along to the consumer. My buddy David Kerman, do you expect to see telcos and social media firms stepping up to become part of the scam prevention solution?
That's a good one.
Hopefully.
Yeah. You know what? I have my thoughts. Why don't you guys jump in?
No, probably not. I mean, unless they're forced to. Look at Facebook. It's just ludicrous what's happening on Facebook. And others have talked about it. The fact you can have all these frauds, scams, and criminal activities just out there in the open. And if anything, Facebook seems to be doing less than they were before. The same is true on Instagram, on TikTok, on Telegram. I just don't see it happening unless they're forced to.
I totally agree to statement from Frank. Maybe there's an opportunity for some companies or maybe startups to extract this data and providing intelligence. I mean, we have seen this with the dark web, the companies screaming the dark web and providing this data back to the companies. Again, if we cannot stop it, maybe we should find a way to extract the data and using it to protect our customers or our business.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's always easy to throw social media under the bus. So I'm always like, well, should we be throwing them under the bus? And by this point, with the number of things I've seen with scams, and this is also an important distinction, not the people who are on the front lines of the trust and safety teams. I don't think they're sitting here saying, oh, we should just let these scams happen. I think from a leadership standpoint, there's some pretty big failings, particularly with Meta. And it's more about enabling and staffing and providing the people the people who are doing the work, the resources they need to be able to tackle this stuff, because it's really hard. So I'm not optimistic, David. I think regulations or some type of forced action is probably the only thing that's going to move the needle in the near term. Yeah. Okay, I may have skipped a couple, but from Miriam, since you provided your perspectives on refund fraud, would you folks consider credit card churning, bank bonus churning a type of fraud perpetrated by savvy consumers?
I don't know about that one. Yeah, that's taking fraud. There's a whole spectrum of first party fraud, and I think that's a really tough one to answer because people are taking advantage of loopholes. Unless they're misrepresenting their identity or something like that, it's hard to call it fraud. And if they're using all their right information, it's tough. It's a tough call, right? Because it's like coupon cutters. They're just using what's out there to get free stuff or to save money.
Maybe the other word, which is often used, is called policy abuse, because there's a policy, and if you know the policy, you might can exploit it in a good way or bad way. But maybe the edge case to fraud.
Great. So there's a question on first party fraud. And what I want to do is we have a poll around that. So I kind of want to launch the poll, and then we can get into conversation about the question. So you should see a poll. What types of first party fraud are you seeing at your organization? A couple jump out to me, but interested. And it could be, probably is often more than just one. And as this rolls in, let me make sure I can find the question again. From Alex, what is your opinion on using consortium products to fight first party fraud? So Frank, knowing a little bit about, why don't you jump in there?
It's great. I mean, you've got consortiums for third party fraud that work great. Consortiums for first party fraud work great too, right? Because a lot of these bad actors are perpetrating over and over again, sometimes using the real identities or variants of their real identities. And I think having a consortium, you can start to put the pieces together. I think it's great.
Nice. And just from the results, chargeback fraud, no shock there as far as first party fraud. That was some of what we were talking about, loan application fraud, ACH fraud, and none for ghost funding. And there's another poll about first party fraud that kind of had some interesting stats, I thought. So let me fire that one up once I can find it. All right, here it is. Publish the poll. According to American Banker, first party fraud is costing FIs more than blank annually. You know what I realized? This is one where I should probably have the answer to the question, shouldn't I? I know we went over this.
Yeah. So the fact is, when you have a fraud question like that, just choose the highest number.
Yeah,
you'll be you'll get the right.
We'll go with 750 billion, guys. Any of these is a lot. So whatever the right answer is, it's a lot. Chris might be in the chat, and he has the Google Doc where that answer lays. This is all the benefits of live webinars, live fun. Cool. Back to some questions. I would like to hear your views on the role of telco providers in fraud prevention. From I think it's pronounced Rika.
Mm-hmm. It's a great question. I think the roles, there's lots of telcos could do. I mean, the biggest one probably is around in phishing and bots and scams. The telcos know, they can see the traffic coming through. They can see the traffic coming from these scam call centers. They could shut them down. Text messages that look like they're bot messages going out to people over and over, they could shut those down. Applications on the phone, like, bot killers, where it's going to help the victim not get it or suppress it or be able to kind of get an alert that it's a scam message. All the above. I mean, there's a lot that telcos could do in preventing a lot of the fraud that's out there, because it's all coming down to the phone in most cases. So they're in the center of it all.
Yeah. I mean, I think of SIM swap fraud the most, which has just been a huge problem, and still is, at least regionally. there's a gentleman in the industry, Anis Ahmed, who in the UAE, they have a little bit better of a control on SIM swap. So I think some of it is the processes, some of it is how willing the telcos are to, work with the mobile network operator information and kind of share that. And I know there's some solutions out there who leverage that information. It can be helpful. So just to kind of piggyback on what Frank said, and our trustee Chris Worley provided the answer of 100 billion for anyone who wouldn't have been able to sleep at night without that answer.
And potentially that's also the reported number. So
yeah,
the real number is much higher.
Yeah, for sure. And that's, I mean, I think that's that question was about first party fraud, but I mean, think about scams. That's the biggest problem. Thinking about predictions, scams, obviously, I think we all think will continue to be bad and get worse. But I think one of the things I like seeing is the work that the Fed is doing with, defining scams, defining typologies better. It's not obviously all unauthorized fraud. Authorized fraud has been defined for a while in the UK, and UK Finance does a report on it, and you can track it. And this all gets back to it's not all self-reported, and it's not, the numbers we see about self-reported are way underestimated for scams. So I think the more we can do to define it, to have people report on it, like the banks, and kind of get numbers, we can define the problem and then do a better job at stopping the problem. Where am I? Oh, that's Frank. That's not a question. We can probably fire up one more poll, unless I'm missing a question here. Yeah, let's do another poll. Yes, this is a perfect one. So some buzzwords here, but important words. Has your organization adopted AI and machine learning for fraud detection, right? So I think since I've started in the industry in 2011, there was buzz around machine learning. It was mainly rules, but it's been around for a while, right? So I think with, AI and generative AI and that becoming a social buzzword more or less, or it's ramped up, like, oh, should we be using this in fraud detection? I think it's been out there for a while. How good, how accurate, how well does it marry with rules and people, I think is another thing. But it looks like the majority is yes, we've adopted it. Frank or Ronald, any thoughts on that?
I mean, if you're not using it, you should. And I think I was in some other sessions earlier. These have been around for 30 years. Agency Falcon, that's AI. If you use Falcon, you're using essentially machine learning and artificial intelligence. It's powerful. We got to fight the bad machines with the good machines. So absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's how you classify it, right? Like,
yeah.
I think ML is a subset of AI, and then what they were doing 30 years ago, Frank, is not what they're doing now. But it's out there. There's value in it. There's also still value in rules, I think, and kind of understanding when and where to use that, and then the data. Like, it's having the right data to train the models, assuming you're using supervised models, is really important. So if you have shit data, that's not going to probably produce a very good score.
Maybe one comment on this, what I've seen, the companies using AI or machine learning models, but they might use rules for very ad hoc decisions. So if you realize something hits your fence right now, you can write a rule straight away and be effective in a minute or in a few minutes, instead of providing feedback and the machine learning adapts and the model updates, which might take more time. So that's where I see still this kind of hybrid running, the companies using on top of the machine learning models also rules.
Yeah, I see that too. And not to get, it can be confusing with the marketing speak of like AI, machine learning. So you got to kind of cut through all of that and see what realistically the value it provides, which could be significant, or it could be not that good. And maybe you look at a different option, or improve rules or processes or people who are managing these systems. I'm bad on. I can see the time ticking up to 25. Chris, do we have a lot more time?
Got about 3 more minutes. Maybe time for like tackling one more question.
Cool. Frank's
Maybe the
answering
question, Frank. I mean, Frank, you have done a great article at the beginning of the year. So any big surprise or any new item which came across your mind in the last 6-7 months?
Yeah, I mean, I think we do the predictions every year. I do that with Marianne Miller, and I do it with Chris Hendrick, and we spend a lot of time coming out with predictions. I think for the most part, they came true, but there were a lot of surprises this year, or maybe not surprises, but things that really, I think, stood out. The first was, this ransomware summer that we seem to be having, where ransomware is now just going crazy across the world in breaches with Snowflake, with CDK, with so many of these things happening right now. I think it's going to spell really bad news for like credential stuffing and imposter scams, because they have so much data now that they're going to be really kind of using that data. And I think we're going to see a lot more account takeover at banks. I think the fintech fraud meltdown, all these enforcement actions. I think Jason McCullough, he's also was on the webinar earlier. He's been really talking about all these enforcement actions against all these fintechs. I think the scale of that kind of surprises me, that almost every one of these banking as a services is getting enforcement action. And then I think the third thing that was a little bit surprising to me was the fact that crypto started to boom again, and people started to fall for the same crypto scams they were getting hit with a couple of years ago. So it's just this constant cycle of boom and bust, that we're seeing kind of play out in different areas. And the fourth thing, I think we talk about check fraud. I think watching check fraud move to the bank branches and move to the teller windows. Tellers used to be the front lines in fraud 30 years ago, and now they are again, because people are going into branches passing these bad checks. So it's just interesting to see that history repeats itself. So it's not a surprise, but it's just another indication that we always got to kind of look back to see where we're going, because it's usually the same thing over and over again.
Awesome. Well, we'll land on Frank's wise words there, Chris.
Excellent. Well, PJ, Ronald, why don't you tell us about something fun that's coming up?
Awesome. I'll do that. Fraud Fight Club, round 2. So we did this last year for financial institutions. We're going to do it again, a standalone event, though, this time in Charlotte. So we're just getting the word out. The idea is to have primarily the folks, the practitioners there, and just collaborating with each other, not just panel conversation, roundtables, networking, all kinds of cool things that we're kind of cooking up right now. So put it on your calendar if you're in the Charlotte area. If you can travel, awesome too. And if you have any questions, shoot us an email or a LinkedIn message or wherever you can find us.
Amazing. Well, I know Unit 21 is planning on being there, and we're excited to make that official too. But this is going to be a really, really great session, and just the work that About Fraud is doing to help educate the community and show up at events like this is just really powerful. So we really appreciate that. If you're not following Frank, PJ, Ronald on LinkedIn, what are you doing with your lives? They post really great, fresh content like every day. So make sure you follow these guys for sure. All right, a couple of really quick commercials. One is we've got to do the obligatory Unit 21 commercial, which is if you're interested in learning more about Unit 21 and some of the ways that we can help you fight fraud, here's a link to a on-demand demo. You can watch at any point in time. It's about 15 minutes, but just kind of shows you a rundown of some of our fraud capabilities. The second thing is we're really excited about a resource we put out every year called the State of Fraud and AML Survey. And we just ask if you can take 5 minutes today at some point and fill this out. What are your insights? I know everybody on here was sharing some really great thoughts and ideas. We want to package all of those up, and we're going to put it in a report that we're going to drop at the beginning of October. So just another resource that we like to give out to the community, but we can't do it without your incredible insights. And last but not least, I wanted to let you know in about 5 minutes from now, we've got 3 more sessions that you can choose from. One is our Fraud Files Account Takeover Edition with Alex, our head of fraud here, and Alexander Hall, who's a reformed fraudster. Should be a really cool session. We also have 5 top fraud challenges facing financial institutions with Haley Wyndham, who I know was on this session, as well as Donna Turner and some others. So it's going to be really powerful. And then one on banking as a service. So I don't know, tough choices. I hope you all are able to switch over to those. But thank you so much for joining us here, and we will see you all in a little bit. Bye-bye.